I thank the chairman, and I find my friend from California, I find his words ironic, because Ronald Reagan was nothing if not a pragmatist and was quite capable of compartmentalizing relationships for the sake of a greater good. And his relations with the Soviet Union were the quintessence of that kind of pragmatism, exactly what's in front of us today. Something's overriding nuclear capability in the region. Shall we deal with it or not? Samuel Taylor Coleridge described fiction as the willing suspension of disbelief. I must say, I find a lot of fiction involved, the willing suspension of disbelief, in some of the criticism of this agreement. It's not perfect. It will hurt Israel. It will give them a nuclear capability someday. It doesn't do enough. It doesn't deal with ancillary and horrendous behavior. Well, who said it would? And here's the bottom line. Valid though many of those criticisms may be, imperfections we can find by the score. What's your program? And you know what I've heard in a series of hearings here? Let's just go back to the P5+1 and Iran and say, we just couldn't sell it, let's start over. That was one of the most monumentally naive statements I've ever heard. And it came from a former member of Congress who knows better. It's not true. It won't happen. At least let's stick to the facts. But no, the willing suspension of disbelief is at work. It's alive and well here, including the issue of the existential threat to Israel. Walking away from this agreement, you need to take responsibility for the consequences to Israel. Whether you're Bibi Netanyahu or you're a member of Congress, and you got to weigh it real carefully. What will happen? What risks am I willing to take before I cast that vote on behalf of our country and our allies like Israel? Mr. Secretary, I think it's an extraordinary job you've done. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk about two problems, and you too, Mr. Secretary, Secretary Moniz. If we walk away from this agreement, what, in your analysis, is likely to happen? And secondly, Secretary Moniz, to me, one of the real vulnerabilities in this agreement is that 24-day problem. All of us have reason to be concerned about that. That's not quite the robust inspection we had hoped for.
So I'm going to be very quick because I want Ernie to get in here. But it's not speculation. It is clear. If Congress rejects this, Iran goes back to its enrichment. The Ayatollah will not come back to the table. Anybody who makes that judgment has not talked to the intel community. There is no way, given his feelings already about the West and his mistrust of us and his reluctance to even have engaged in this discussion, that he's suddenly going to re-enter if we reject this. Moreover, the sanctions regime completely falls apart. The folks we relied on to provide a united front here, France, Germany, Britain, China, Russia, go off, and we will have set ourselves back, folks. I don't know how I go out to another country, if that happens, and say, hey, you ought to negotiate with us, or you ought to talk to us about any issue, whatever it is, with a reliance that we can actually deliver. Because they will sit there and say, well, you got 535 secretaries of state in the United States. We don't know who we're negotiating with. And whatever deal we make always risks being overturned. That is not the traditional relationship that has existed between the executive and the Congress. And so, and finally, Iran will say, we're free. We can go back to our program. And what I said earlier about bringing year 15 to today, it happens, year 20, whatever it is. They will take their 19,000 centrifuges, they have the ability to enrich, and they will feel we backed off. Ernie, would you address the...
Yeah. First, let me just add that from my 5 months at the negotiating table, I doubt our P5+1 partners would be any more interested in going back to the table than Iran. On the 24 days, again, let me emphasize that all the regular access, well, for declared sites, it's constant. The 24 days is a new tool in the sense that there's never been any limit at all. And so the key is in getting enough of a compressed process where we feel confident in being able to detect any use of nuclear materials, number one, over that time period. And in a classified environment, we could provide even more evidence than I've already discussed today.